affecting? So when you had men coming in, were they saying, I really can't do it without the porn on, or I need to watch this particular video? Were they asking you to play out things that you might have imagined or you knew they had seen in a porn film?
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that most of this stuff was so kind of banal that it actually was just kind of background wallpaper, and most of the clients that I saw barely looked at it. If they did, they kind of sniggered away with me. I have 3 examples of clients who came in who I felt were affected by pornographic iconography. There was one gentleman who would come in and he would book me or one of the other ladies, and he would demand that the porn was on, and he would ask me to get out of the way while he was watching it. So I would be having sex with him and he'd be like, can you just move your head slightly to the left because, you know, you're blocking the view. So he would have this fantasy experience running at the same time as a real live girl was having sex with him. But I have to say, he didn't seem to be a maladjusted guy to me. He was an extremely sane person. That was just what he liked to do, and he was paying for a service, and that was fine with me. Then I remember there were 2 young boys, probably somewhere over 18 and under 20, who came in one night, and they said, you know, in a brothel, you discuss the service with the lady before you go into the room, and they said, what we'd really like to do is ejaculate on your face. And I said, oh, I don't think so. And they said, oh, but wouldn't you like it? And I said, well, not a lot. Like, why would you think I would enjoy that? What makes you imagine? They said, well, we've seen lots of porn movies, you know, the money shot. And I said, well, quite apart from the fact I'll have to redo all my makeup, you know, there are sexual health issues with semen getting into the membranes of your eyes and HIV transmission and so on. And it's just not a very nice thing to do to someone. So they were the experiences I had, but I have to say they were absolutely the exception in my experience.
So in other words, that the vast majority weren't asking for that sort of thing. And what about after? Because your book, The Romantics, takes us kind of, you know, into your life post-sex work, and it's still, you know, a fraught world with relationships, and you're still having, you're dealing with lots of different sorts of relationships. Does it ever come up in those relationships?
Well, look, I mean, I had sex with hundreds of men. This is a great thing to say to an audience of hundreds of people.
I hope your mother's listening.
I did, in the brothels, and then obviously I've had sexual encounters in normal life. I've got to say the majority of my experiences are that men are stupid in bed rather than malign. I don't think we can underestimate, and all respect to the gentlemen in the audience, but I think very few people understand how many men are kind of cretinous in bed, but it's out of ignorance rather than, you know, spite. So that was more the issue I had. I ran a one-woman education campaign, but very, you know, believe me, there are women out there who are thanking me to this day, but, you know, that's part of the thing, and I suppose this ties into the pornography element, is that there is an educational aspect to teaching people how to make love, and you would be amazed at how many men have no idea what they're doing.
Catherine.
Yeah, I just want to say, Kate, gorgeous description. This is one of the things, and you know, of course, Gail may have something to say about this, but one of the things we found in the Australian study, and I emphasise this was very much an Australian study, was that we did a study of over 1,000 porn consumers, you know, 20% of whom were women, some of them were gay as well as straight, and we asked them, because almost all the research into pornography has been about what are the adverse effects, how has this made things worse, you know. So we just asked them in this research, well, has it had any positive effect? And what, you know, one of the top ones was that about 45% watched it with their partner, gay or straight, and they felt that it was a kind of, at times it was something that they used in their sex life, and it made their sex life better at times. But one of the other ones was that they used it for learning really basic anatomical things, like learning how to go down on a woman, yes. Which a lot of, you know, let's just be honest, and maybe this is a failure of our education system, a lot of young boys are, you know, where's the clitoris? What the hell's that? It's a
huge failure.
You know, it's trying to play a tiny violin on the deck of a sort of sinking ship to a lot of guys, and it takes a while.
That's right. Well, until recently, apparently, they were drawing it anatomically incorrect in medical books. So it's not really surprising that we weren't getting it right. Gail.
Yeah, can I say, I mean, actually, this is a, you know, fun, great conversation. I don't think it's got anything to do with reality. I mean, when you look at what pornography is, when you go out there and you look at the research, and let me tell you, your book is very different to 30 years of research. And what was interesting as an academic is that you didn't engage with any of the research. You said there was no research or very little research. And I'm looking in the back for all the names of the psychologists, experimental psychologists, who for 30 years have got a body of research. And it felt a bit to me like the climate deniers, that you refuse to engage in the empirical research that we now have from 30 years. So let me talk about the idea of what men learn from pornography, because I go across the country in the United States of America. I speak to thousands of men. I also listen to my students. My students don't have that experience. My students tell me that their boyfriends are not interested in them sexually. They want to get off as quick as possible. Most of them will not do oral sex. They insist that they get rid of all their pubic hair because they're disgusted by it, because they're used to looking at pornography with women with no pubic hair. The reality of it is that they're not looking at people making love. In pornography, and again, I'm looking at mainstream pornography that most men use, men do not make love to women. They make hate. All the things that you associate with love, connection, intimacy, all of those things are missing. And in its place is disgust and revulsion and anger and rage. And I'm telling you, if you want to know what really pornography is, don't take my word. Go on Adult Video News when you go home. Go to the charts, look up, and go onto the websites. Don't take my word for it. Just go and see it. And what I would like, if we're going to talk about pornography, let's talk about the real industry. Otherwise, we may as well just talk about, I don't know, pornography that maybe 5 people are watching.
Well, actually, what you just cited was anecdotal evidence. So I think what would be fantastic is, I was going to ask you this anyway, can you give us the study that you think shows that your view, and I'm not talking about, how many films are in Gonzo. I'd like to know the study that says, here's the one that shows us that how many boys are watching it, how often they're watching it, and how their sexuality is being distorted as a consequence.
No,
that's the data that I looked for.
Right,
I looked for
okay, let me tell you where to go.
I'd be interested.
Okay, the best thing to go to really look at it is by a man named Neil Malamuth. And why it's good is he did what's called a meta-analysis, which in academia means basically you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of research and you're making sense of it. What I would suggest, don't look at one study, look at the hundreds, and that's what Neil Malamuth did with Mary Koss in the Annals of Psychological Journal. And in there, he talks about what the findings are. And I have to tell you, as a social scientist, you don't point to one study. What kind of a social scientist would I be to point to one study? I'm pointing to hundreds and hundreds of studies. And they're all in the back of my book, so I really do encourage you all to buy my book, and you will see the lists and lists of studies, so no question. And Neil Malamuth is the one
So these
study.
are the studies, because I did miss them, these are the studies that say, here's what they're doing, here's how often they're doing it, and here's how we know that the thing we then see in the future, which you're calling an inauthentic, I think, or distorted sexuality, is connected to that porn watching.
Absolutely, without question. 30 years ago.
Catherine.
Gail, as I say, I say anything to you respectfully and with an ethic of engagement, and I have read your work, and as I said, you and I were at a conference together. The one thing I would want to clarify is that we did do a meta-analysis when we did this, and we read a lot of the American research, and what I was saying is that one of our conclusions, and this is, I think, often, for me, true about social science research in the US, is that it often comes to objects of media studies with a view of, well, what harm is it doing? And I guess that's probably very much where we differ methodologically. I think the media studies framework in Australia is different, but I know the study you're talking about, and we did read those things. The second thing I'd say is that we could sit here for hours or weeks really debating different methodologies and so on. But I think that really what is animating this conversation in many ways is a different perspective on human sexuality. And absolutely, you're a feminist, Kate is, I am. But taking from what Kate says, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, that we kind of come at this idea of sexuality and heterosexuality with a view that there's something inherently messy in that business and messy in desire. And when you use that word inauthentic, that's a word that I don't really quite understand, because I think there are many ways of being a sexual being. And I think one kind of relationship is monogamous and you're in love and all of these things, but I think there are other ways of being sexual.
And I would completely agree. When I say inauthentic, I don't mean Gail Dines has the one way you be sexual and you better follow me, otherwise you're inauthentic. What I'm saying is, look, pornography is to sex what McDonald's is to food. It's an industrialization of it, okay? It's the generic, formulaic, plasticized, technologized version of sex, commodified and industrialized. What I am saying is that sex is messy. There's 1,000 ways to have sex. It grows out of your experiences. It grows out of who you are. It is not going to grow out of the porn industry. Why would you want to go to a bunch of white men for authentic creative sexuality, for fuck's sake? I mean, go to your own lives, go to who you are. But this is what is surprising. Would you go to any capitalist for anything authentic? So I'm saying this kills authenticity. And you know what's authentic? It's what you define for yourself that makes sense in your life, not what some capitalist decides for you.
We're going to move to questions soon, so I'm going to ask one more question of the panel. In the meantime, our lovely people are going to wander around and respond to your raised hands by giving you a microphone. Kate, I think the last question I'd really like to throw at you. In some ways, it seems to me like a friend of mine told me the other day that there's two big things that motivate us. One is fear and one is hope. And apparently in any electoral contest you'll ever have, that's what the politicians will basically be at the centre of their campaigns. It will either be fear or it'll be hope. And I just wonder whether or not, in some senses, I thought the Romantics was a kind of, as you acknowledge, a kind of acknowledgement of the complexity of the whole thing, and the acknowledgement that we have defined women and defined their sexuality and their reproduction in a particular way for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and now suddenly we're offering something different. And in some ways it seemed to me like what you were portraying was what that was like as a human being on the ground, trying to live that new way of thinking about what we are and what we're entitled to, but crashing up against the old ideas. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my book, The Romantic, is a memoir about my experience, and it's also a story, I think, of a young woman, myself, who's enfranchised, white, middle-class, highly educated, has every reason to feel like a powerful woman, a feminist, and yet my behaviour did not always match what I idealised as what a feminist in those circumstances would do. And I think there's a theme in the book, which is that women have so much over-determination coming at them, and some of it is laudable, some of it is very difficult and oppressive. But in even the laudable, the aspirational feminist or powerful woman that we try to be is not always achievable, and there is conflict within ourselves then. So if I went off and I offered or I let a hotel concierge in Naples have sex with me when I didn't really want to. I then punished myself by analysing why it was, and I went off and I called myself a fucking thing. You fucking slut, you thing. Why did you do that? And yet I don't think I was a slut. I don't think I was a thing. What I was I was wrestling with these two different dynamics, and I was trying to be romantic while they were trying to see me sexually. There was so much confusion in this relationship.
And what do you aspire to? So what is that aspiration in terms of sexuality?
Well, I imagine I should be someone who says no when I mean no, who says, I want to do this, you're going to do this for me, this is how you touch my clitoris, this is how you do everything else. But even with my experience and my advantages and prerogatives in life, I'm not always that person, and I find it more interesting to acknowledge that than to deny it. So my project is to educate myself into being more like that, but not be hard on myself or on other women for not matching that ideal.
Can you teach me when you put it down?
That's right, and then you'll be out on the hustings teaching everybody else. So have we got our first question over here? Eva.
Well, as another sort of Jewish sociologist, lefty, etc., Gail, I'd like to ask you a question. Why do we always focus on violent pornography and misogynist violent pornography rather than on violent misogynist violence? Is there something sort of inherent in a particular type of feminism that manages to treat anything to do with sexuality, including sex workers, as something different from the ordinary? It does worry me, because I think we can all discuss whether or not we want violent misogyny, but why do we actually have to focus on the pornography area and make such a fuss about it because it is part of a pornography thing? I mean, I think that echoes some very puritanical views that unfortunately often appear in feminism around the things to do with sex. And the second part of my question, which is just a very quick one, is you say, OK, you're against the idea of government sort of actually running any sort of censorship. Well, how would you feel when your book's used by the Tea Party to actually put up various legislation to ban most of the things we care about?
Oh my God, did
Gail.
the Tea Party even read books? I didn't realise that. No, I'm sorry, that's a classist statement, I shouldn't say that.
Australia
I take that
breaking
back.
the bad news.
I take that back. Let me tell you, the Tea Party ain't reading my book, right? And so let's talk about... But let's think about I'm going to answer your question. Let's talk about why I'm looking at violent pornography. Well, no, actually, I'm not looking at violent pornography. I'm looking at mainstream pornography through the industry, which happens to be violent and body punishing and brutal. I also look at violence in the media. That was also what I study. And I look at the effects of violence in the media.